Hi there, welcome back to IndyCar on, 21st of February. Now, there's an interesting series of stories in the media today, but there are two that I really want to focus on. The first one is Britain's so-called at-sea deterrent, our nuclear deterrent. Now, it's come to light, I think, rather late in the day, actually, considering when this event happened, that a British nuclear submarine, which had been in America for a complete refit, and considering the fact that this refit was meant to cost something like £200 million, and it ended up costing over £500 million, again, another indication of the massive amounts of money wasted by the United Kingdom on cost overruns, far more than any ferries that we have, which are obviously much more essential to daily life here. But anyway, this submarine was refitted at massive expense in America and took part in a live firing exercise. Now, the United Kingdom has a pretty dismal record of test firing its nuclear missiles from its submarines. The last one occurred some 8 years ago in 2016, when the United Kingdom test fired a Trident 2 missile in the same sort of location as this happened, this latest misadventure. And on that occasion, back in 2016, that missile veered dramatically off course. It was meant to splash down at a location part of the way across the Atlantic off the western seaboard of Africa. Unfortunately, in 2016, that missile veered back towards the United States, actually heading back to its own territory, which would, had it been fired in anger, have been a complete catastrophe. So that was embarrassing enough, but to add to this embarrassment, this latest misfire occurred when the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, was actually on board the submarine. Interesting point of fact here that Grant Shapps seems to have jinxed the whole thing. But anyway, the launch went ahead, and in submarines like this, the launch is usually done whilst the submarine is submerged at periscope depth. In other words, it's a few tens of feet below the surface of the ocean. So in order to fire the missile, it has to be ejected from its tube under high pressure, a bit like a sort of compressed air cannon, I suppose, which fires the missile out of the tube. And as it breaches the surface of the ocean, it's meant to ignite its solid fuel rocket motor, which is then supposed to take it to its intended target. Unfortunately, it came out of the tube okay, it breached the surface of the water, and then the engine didn't light. And so the missile just simply fell back into the sea with a plop, according to reports, whilst Grant Shapps was in the submarine. Now, had that missile been armed, I don't know whether that would have caused a problem. It's possible, though unlikely, but it's possible that it could actually have collided with the submarine underwater, done some damage to it. But the effect of this has been again to discredit the United Kingdom's policy of a continually at-sea nuclear deterrent. In other words, a submarine armed with nuclear missiles on patrol below the surface of the Atlantic normally for months at a time, whilst its other nuclear armed submarines are in being refitted or rearmed or serviced. Now that's quite a problem when you think about it, because each one of these missiles, to fire it, costs £17 million, or is it $17 million? One of the two. So it's a colossal amount of money to waste on something which didn't work. And this is already adding to the embarrassment of the Royal Navy, which saw its flagship, the Queen Elizabeth, unfortunately not managing to make it to a planned NATO exercise because of a propeller shaft coupling failure, which is now to be repaired in Scotland at Rosyth Naval Dockyard, I understand, which is the only aircraft carrier-sized facility big enough to do the job. So the United Kingdom's Navy is looking pretty silly at the moment. I'd have to say, though, that despite the fact that this is an embarrassment for the UK, it is probably more the fault of the Americans who refitted the submarine, because according to the Ministry of Defence, the system failure that occurred was specific to the launch system. Now, the launch system is on the submarine, and that's owned by the American military. They develop the missiles, they own the missiles, they own the launch tubes, and the entire system is really their responsibility. So whatever went wrong, it was screwed up by the Americans when they refitted it, and not the British Navy, who presumably just there to press the button and watch the thing take off. So it's unfortunate for the Ministry of Defence that this has happened now, so close on the heels of another embarrassing mishap with their aircraft carrier, but it's not unexpected. The Ministry of Defence in the UK has a long history of disastrous naval design problems. I mean, the last one I remember before the aircraft carrier was when new destroyers were being built, which worked fine when they were in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, but when the British Navy went down to the warmer, balmy waters of the Mediterranean, the engines overheated because the designers of the ship's cooling system forgot that sometimes the sea is warm in certain parts near the equator, and therefore their cooling systems couldn't handle it and the engines would shut down. So that again was an embarrassing gaffe by the designers of these British naval warships. So there is quite a long track record of screw-ups with this type of hardware. On the whole, I think, and to be fair to the UK military, this looks more like it was an American problem, and unfortunately any deterrent, any nuclear deterrent, for it to be credible. And if I were Vladimir Putin looking at this right now, I would be laughing into my cornflakes this morning, because for it to be credible, the missiles have to be reliable. They have to 100% work and get to their targets. Otherwise, the person who's threatening you with their own nuclear missiles, which presumably are reliable, knows that you're not going to be able to hit them back properly, and therefore you lose some credibility, and it's more likely that you'll be attacked than not. So the deterrence starts to crumble. You have the intention to use them, you push the button, but the missile doesn't fly. And this is a big, big issue. However, that's not the end of the story. The British Ministry of Defence has an ageing fleet of nuclear-powered submarines which need a lot of maintenance at the moment to keep them going, probably well past their normal sort of expiry date, their lifespan. And they are planning to replace the entire fleet with a new fleet. And the British government has said that it's planning to spend between 31 and 41 billion pounds replacing all 4 of its nuclear-armed missile submarines at some point in the next few years. Now, 41 billion pounds is approximately the entire national budget for Scotland for a year. And that is just to build 4 submarines. And that's assuming that the missile systems that the Americans provide for these submarines actually work this time. Interestingly, there's a funny breakdown of who owns what in nuclear deterrent in the United Kingdom. The submarines are owned by the British Navy, or the British government, Ministry of Defence. The nuclear tips, in other words the atom bombs which go on the warheads, and sometimes there can be up to 5 of those on every missile targeted to different places. Each one of those nuclear bombs, those atomic bombs, is actually built and owned by the British government. So we own the subs, we own the nuclear bombs, but the missiles belong to the United States, and it's the United States which has to say whether or not the UK can actually fire them. So it's complicated and expensive, and is it worth it? Is it deterring anyone at the moment? That's questionable, I think. Now that brings me to the next topic for today, which is Anna Sarwar, the notional leader of the optional identity mark of the British Labour Party in Scotland, who said repeatedly on public broadcast television recently that he would stand up to Sir Keir Starmer, his own leader, in the interests of Scotland. In other words, there is a list of potential policy decisions made by Sir Keir Starmer which, according to Anna Sarwar, he will oppose to prevent Scotland having things like the 2-child benefit cap kept in place when it really should be scrapped, things like that, and all sorts of other unpopular moves which disadvantage the most poor and the most vulnerable people in Scottish society. So he says he's going to stand up to Sir Keir Starmer, except he can't, because there is no Scottish Labour Party that is independent of the British Labour Party. Keir Starmer is his boss. Anna Sarwar, if he became an MP, or if any of his Labour candidates become MPs, have to accept the Labour whip. Now, the Labour whip means that whatever Sir Keir Starmer says he must do, he has to do, and that means voting for all these things he says he's going to stand up against. So Sarwar is clearly fibbing when he said that he would or could stand up to Sir Keir Starmer. And to me, this seems like a wide open political goal for the SNP to shoot through, because by a strange quirk, the very devolution settlement, which meant that no politicians in Holyrood, especially if they are the leaders or members of a British registered party, none of those Scottish MPs can refuse the whip, because if you refuse the whip in Westminster, you're basically deselected, you're basically sacked. So all Labour MPs elected in a general election from Scotland are actually duty-bound to obey the great leader Sir Keir Starmer. It's been also pointed out by a few pundits today that both Keir Starmer and Anas Sarwar are both millionaires in their own right, what we used to call champagne socialists, telling the rest of us working class hacks how we should live and how they're going to protect us, when clearly they have absolutely no experience whatsoever of having to live on the kinds of low wages and in the housing estates of the cities of Scotland. They have absolutely zero experience, zero empathy for that, and just about everything that they say is geared to winning a general election by stealing the clothes of the Tory opposition, so they don't scare away the potential swing voters in the southeast of England, who would normally vote Tory, are a bit fed up with it, and are looking for a bit of a change, but not one which would actually affect their standard of living or the security of their wealth. So Sir Keir Starmer is the ideal figure for that. He is remarkably Tory for a Labour leader. He has U-turned on virtually every promise he's made to reverse Tory cuts, to reverse things like these child benefit caps. He's not going to do that. He has now reneged on his promise to assuring a new green deal, a transition from burning fossil fuels to going to renewables. He's basically just refused to do all the things he said he would do. And Sarwar, on the other hand, has promised to do things that he can't do. And he knows he can't do, but he hopes that people in Scotland will not realise that he can't do them, because he would be a Labour MP if he was elected, or if any of his candidates were elected, and they would be duty bound to do what Sir Keir Starmer says, or face the sack. So there is no way at all that anything Anas Sarwar says can be true, simply because it's not possible under the Westminster system, and under the devolution system which his party ushered in makes him powerless to stand up to his own leader, simply because he doesn't have an independent Labour Party here in Scotland. If he did, he might have a chance of doing any of the things he suggested, but he doesn't, and therefore most of, if not all of, what Anas Sarwar has said or claimed recently is nonsense and simply cannot be done. So I would hope that, I know the SNP has latched onto a lot of this stuff already in their public statements, but it would be good for the SNP's MPs to actually stand up to the British Labour Party, because if they do win and Sir Keir Starmer ends up at the helm of the great ship United Kingdom, it looks like all this massive overspending will go on. We'll still keep these gigantically expensive deterrents which don't seem to work, and at the cost of helping the people in Scotland who really need it. Frankly, I think all of the focus being on deterrence at the moment is an echo of the changing political circumstances around the world at the moment, and the wobbliness that Western democracies are experiencing, as a lot of their existing, I would say, political structures seem to be either crumbling or at risk of crumbling from within because of populist politicians such as Donald Trump, who basically says one thing and does another, or says one thing and it's got nothing to do with what he's actually talking about. For example, I'll give you a little taste of what Trump did recently when Alexei Navalny's death was announced. Trump said that Alexei Navalny's sudden death was a reminder of just how badly the United States media was treating Donald Trump. That has nothing to do with Alexei Navalny's death, and yet these two conflicting narratives that he stitched together made no sense at all. It's completely incoherent, but it's this kind of dissonance and this kind of blind exponential nonsense that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth that is getting people worried, and they are worried about exactly what he would do if Putin did threaten Europe's eastern flank, for example. How would Donald Trump react to that? Would he start rattling the nuclear saber? Would he position nuclear weapons more towards Europe? Things like that. We don't know. But because of this uncertainty in the United States at the moment, and its wavering over its support to Ukraine, and its continued support of Israel, is getting everybody worried about all sorts of different wars in different places and things getting out of control and escalating. So the pressure is on for things like nuclear deterrence to actually work, and for them to fail at a time of critical need, when they needed to demonstrate to people like Vladimir Putin that the nuclear deterrent is alive and well and works great. It fails. And it fails in the hands of the United Kingdom submariners, unfortunately for them. And I honestly don't believe the submariners were the problem here. This was a fault in the system, and it's a system designed and built in America at massive expense, which we pay for, and paid twice as much for as we should have with this refit. So there you go. That's the way it looks at the moment. So we've got a deterrent that doesn't seem to work, and we have a political leader, a Labour political leader in Scotland, who cannot lead and cannot make promises about what he's going to do to defy his boss. In the meantime, we have an SNP government which appears to be, I don't know what it's doing. It doesn't seem to be a great deal of coherence in the SNP yet, but I would imagine before the general election starting gun is fired, they ought to get their act together and come up with some concrete and more attractive propositions for Scottish voters. Right, that's it from me today. Hopefully I'll see you again soon. In the meantime, if you can afford it, please keep donating. It's keeping me afloat at a difficult time at the moment. Also, remember to share this as widely as possible. This broadcast is available almost every day, uploaded to YouTube later on. At the moment, the YouTube videos are getting far more audience than these videos on live stream on Facebook, and that's simply because of Facebook algorithms. But YouTube is less restricted, and we're getting growing audiences up to 6,500 views in some of the posts on YouTube. So that's excellent. Keep sharing to YouTube, keep watching me on YouTube as well. Like and subscribe to the channel. Now the channel on YouTube, incidentally, is just called Scottish Independence, and it covers myself, it covers the two Davies, and a lot of interesting content from Scottish politics on a regular basis. But if you like and subscribe to the channel, obviously it helps me and it helps this program. That's it from me today. I'll see you again, I think, later on in the week. Hopefully tomorrow we'll get another show out. It would be nice if there was some good news for a change, but I'm afraid there just isn't any right now. I'll see you later. Keep the faith. Bye for now.